Hello, everyone. I have a feeling that this video will delight many of you. Indeed, many of you have been asking for a video on Spinoza for some time now, some for months, even years. I know, I've taken my time, putting it off again and again, because Spinoza is no small subject. He's a major figure in philosophy, and you need to prepare seriously before embarking on such an undertaking. So I hope this video meets your expectations. Approaching Spinoza is complex because his philosophical system seeks to embrace the totality. In other words, he aspires to explain God or nature, concepts he fuses together, representing all that exists. You can imagine the challenge of covering such a vast subject in a YouTube video, so please bear with me. This video is intended as an introduction to Spinoza's thought, rather than a complete exposition of his philosophy. Before delving into his system of thought, a few biographical details are in order, for Spinoza was truly an extraordinary character. A 17th century philosopher and Portuguese Jew exiled to the Netherlands, he was controversial for his ideas on religion. Excommunicated by the Jewish community, he even survived an assassination attempt. Interestingly, he kept the coat pierced by his assailant's dagger until his death. His major work, Ethics, was published in 1677, 2 years after his death, aware of the risks it entailed during his lifetime. Spinoza was a direct, uncompromising philosopher whose ideas were innovative, even revolutionary, for his time. Before detailing his philosophical positions, it's important to understand the context of his time, when Spinoza was Descartes' principal opponent. Monism, a key concept for Spinoza, marks his divergence from Descartes. Unlike Descartes, who defended a dualistic vision, clearly distinguishing between matter and spirit, Spinoza envisaged a more integrated relationship between these two aspects. He thus prefigured monism, the idea that mind and body cannot be dissociated. This perspective runs counter to an ontological tradition dating back to Plato, which saw the separation of mind and body as self-evident, a vision that harmonized with the Christian dualism of material and spiritual. For Spinoza, however, this separation was unfounded. He postulated that mind and body are simply two attributes of a single substance, which he identified with God or nature. To illustrate the concept of monism, let's take the example of cannabis. Cannabis alters both mental and physical capacities, illustrating the interdependence of mind and body. Cannabis consumption alters perception and thought, while also affecting physical capacities, as demonstrated by the difficulty of boxing or weight training under its influence. This example underlines the fact that psychic changes have physical consequences, demonstrating the interaction and inseparability of the spiritual and material spheres. In the cannabis-induced state, the distinction between mind and body becomes blurred, revealing a mutual influence where physical and mental limpness manifests itself without discrimination between the two dimensions. This illustrates Spinoza's parallelism, where body and mind are in constant correlation, influencing and reflecting each other without clear separation. This interconnectedness will be explored in more detail in a future video, but for now, it's important to recognize that Spinoza's thought embraces a holistic vision. The difficulty in grasping Spinoza's thought lies in his monistic approach, which differs significantly from Cartesian dualism. This monistic perspective directly influences his conception of freedom. For Spinoza, freedom is perceived as an illusion, an idea that contrasts sharply with the Cartesian notion of free will, where the individual has the ability to choose independently of material constraints. In the Cartesian system, free will is perceived as a decree of the soul, where the will can determine itself freely, independently of external influences, suggesting a clear separation between body and mind. In Spinozist monism, on the other hand, this distinction is erased, calling into question the existence of an independent free will, as man is seen as a unified entity of physical and spiritual nature. Man, as a conscious being, tends to perceive himself as the initiator of his actions, which is a mainstay of modern societies, where the idea that we control our actions prevails. This belief supports the notion of personal responsibility, essential to the concept of justice. Without free will, responsibility would collapse, as an individual could argue that his actions are the automatic result of his body, denying his guilt. If we deny free will, any action could be justified, calling into question the foundations of our social structure. Imagine someone invoking Spinoza's monism to deny responsibility for a betrayal, lie, or injury, declaring himself inevitably conditioned and not guilty. While Spinoza's perspective poses challenges for the legal political framework, it raises a crucial question. Are we truly the authors of our actions? This question extends to thoughts and actions, reflecting Spinoza's vision of a lack of clear separation between thought and matter. Spinoza asserts that the order and connection of ideas are identical to the order and connection of things, suggesting a mechanical relationship between our ideas and our actions, where each is inextricably linked to the other. The perception that action follows from thought or vice versa is challenged by Spinoza, who sees this view as erroneous and reductive of human complexity and the interplay between body and mind. The reciprocal influence between our material conditions and our opinions, and how these influence our actions, demonstrates the interconnection between our mental and physical states. The concept of free will, as defended by Descartes, has its roots in Christianity, notably in St. Augustine, who proclaimed that man, endowed with free will by God, is responsible for good or evil on earth. This idea implies that humans, unlike inanimate objects or animals, have a will of their own and therefore free will. By illustrating with a pen, Descartes makes it clear that inanimate objects have no will or free will. Their movement is determined solely by the physical forces applied. Following this logic, he calls animals machines, not to indicate that they are made of metal, but to emphasize that they act according to determined natural processes without free will. Descartes postulated that animals act according to instinct, without the intervention of the will, in the absence of awareness of this instinct. In his view, human beings are distinguished by their free will, aware of their motivations and desires, unlike animals, which are seen as machines acting mechanically, without conscience or will. Humans, on the other hand, are guided by a consciousness that sets them apart from the simplicity of inanimate objects or beasts, giving them a dimension beyond the physical and material. Indeed, humans can resist external influences, possessing the ability to refuse. However, for Spinoza, this notion of human free will is misleading, as individuals do not fully grasp the origins of their desires or thoughts. They do not perceive the causal chain of their decisions. For example, by getting up to take a yogurt from the fridge, we believe we are exercising a free choice, without recognizing the multiple unconscious factors influencing this action. According to Spinoza, even if we believe we are deciding freely, there are many underlying reasons, of which we are unaware, that determine our actions. Spinoza argues that, although we can decide, we have no control over the motivations underlying our choices. Our decisions, superficial in appearance, are based on desires and passions that we do not choose, but endure. Like a force-propelled pen with no capacity for resistance, we are guided by determinism, where each cause leads to an effect in an endless causal chain. To illustrate, a sudden craving for yogurt may be the result of an advertisement seen just before, imprinting itself on our subconscious and triggering the craving. This example symbolizes the vast range of influences that shape our desires and actions without us being fully aware of it. Consider a high school student opting to study biology, seemingly exercising a free choice, whereas this choice may be predestined by his family environment and a passion for science passed on from childhood. Despite the subjective conviction of having chosen freely, this choice could have been predetermined by these influential factors, highlighting the complexity of free will according to Spinoza. Although subjectively perceived as an act of free will, every choice is in reality the result of a chain of causes and effects that lead us to it. This perception of freedom is rooted in a causal sequence from which we cannot extricate ourselves, for as physical beings, we are inextricably bound to the laws of matter. Our actions, including our sense of free choice, are governed by these inescapable laws. For example, if we try to take flight by jumping off a balcony, the laws of physics will immediately intervene, reminding us of the limits of our freedom through physical constraints. Similarly, making pancakes requires following a precise recipe. Ignoring essential ingredients like eggs and flour would make the task impossible. This illustrates that every act in the physical world must conform to specific rules. This concept may seem intuitive, But in practice, we often forget these fundamental laws. Take dominoes, for example. The fall of the last domino is the direct mechanical consequence of the push applied to the first. This causal chain illustrates that our actions take place within a deterministic framework, where each effect follows logically from its initial cause. We often tend not to perceive the link between our initial actions and their ultimate consequences, focusing only on the immediate effects, like a fly persisting and knocking against a window without noticing the opening next to it. This mental limitation confines us to a kind of blindness to the causal chain to which we belong. This inability to recognize the complete sequence of causes and effects traps us in an illusion, as Spinoza illustrates with the metaphor of the thrown stone. If a stone, at the moment of being thrown, possessed consciousness, it might believe itself to be the initiator of its movement, unaware that its trajectory has been defined by an external force. In this analogy, we are comparable to the stone, often convinced that we are the autonomous authors of our actions, when in fact they are determined by external factors. According to Spinoza, free will is an illusion as long as we see ourselves as the primary source of our actions and thoughts, which are in fact closely interrelated. This raises a profound question. Are we really more autonomous than a stone or an animal, or are we also subject to the forces of the external world, with no real control over our choices and actions? Does this suggest that we are captives of a deep-seated illusion, victims of a pride that lets us believe in our freedom of thought and action, when in fact it's all a fantasy? Not entirely. This interpretation needs to be nuanced to accurately reflect Spinoza's thinking on freedom and determinism. It is common to refer to Spinoza to argue that man is no freer than a thrown stone or an animal guided by instinct, presenting freedom as a mere philosophical illusion based solely on our ignorance of the causes that condition us. However, it is essential to fully understand Spinoza's message, which requires a thorough reading of his work, Ethics. Gilles Deleuze points out that Spinoza titled his book The Ethics because it is based on the idea that man has the capacity to choose. Ethics only makes sense if individuals have some degree of control over themselves. If Spinoza confined himself to describing the illusion of free will as a sequence of causes and effects, the term ethics would have no raison d'etre. Instead, he would have spoken of ontology, the study of being and existence. But Spinoza was talking about ethics, i.e., action-oriented thinking. If humans did not have the capacity to determine their actions, there would be no reason to speak of ethics. For Spinoza, freedom is possible and real. The question, then, is how to access this freedom. Spinoza tells us that, thanks to his conscience, the human being can recognize the influences that direct his choices and actions. This awareness, which he calls reason, is the key to achieving freedom according to his ethics. According to Spinoza, reason is crucial because it opens the door to freedom. It doesn't just make us aware of our determination, it enables us to understand that this determination is influenced by forces acting on us, and in particular on our emotions. Let's delve deeper into this concept, as it can be quite perplexing. For Spinoza, reason is not merely the ability to comprehend our predetermined nature. Instead, it entails the capacity to identify the specific influences that determine us, the forces that impact us and primarily shape our emotions, or what Spinoza calls affects. Our emotions, as Spinoza emphasizes, as I discussed in my video on Stoicism, are not under our direct control. Rather, they happen to us. We experience them. Hence the use of the Greek term pathos to describe the passions, depicting what our soul undergoes. Consider anxiety, for instance, which represents a state of unease and a passion we endure. This emotion arises in situations of uncertainty tinged with fear. Let's envision a scenario where our partner, expected home by 6 p.m., has not arrived by 7 p.m. Perhaps they've decided to stop at a bar to relax with friends. However, if our attempts to reach them yield no response, anxiety may surface, indicating our lack of knowledge about their whereabouts. This fear, fueled by uncertainty, might lead us to worry about an accident, a disappointing encounter, or the notion that they're enjoying themselves without us. Is this fear rational? No, because it does not contribute to a clearer understanding of the actual situation. In Spinoza's philosophy, we encounter an echo of Stoicism, particularly in the notion that passions enslave us while reason emancipates us. When confronted with anxiety, adopting a rational perspective can cause that anxiety to dissipate. This is because passion fades in the presence of the potency of reason. The capacity of certain individuals to approach potentially anxiety-inducing situations with tranquility stems from their application of reason, namely their realization that emotional reactions neither alter reality nor improve the circumstances. Acknowledging that our passions do not change the facts introduces us to the realm of reason, or what Spinoza refers to as the temple of reason. Reason possesses a sort of magical power to dispel emotion, passion, and suffering. Spinoza assures us that by embracing reason, we encounter joy, not as a fleeting emotion, but as a stable state of being, arising from a rational comprehension of reality. Joy, as Spinoza outlines, is not merely an emotion, but a mode of existence rooted in rationality. When guided by joy, or by reason, we transcend our emotions and passions. In this state, our actions become deliberate and free. While this notion may appear abstract, it extends beyond mere theoretical understanding to touch upon personal experience. To act with joy is to act with the full recognition that things are as they are, and it is in this acceptance that the profound, intense joy of existence is unveiled. In Spinoza's philosophy, freedom resides in the complete awareness of our capacity to act, think, and be, without attempting to evade the physical laws governing the universe. Genuine freedom is not about indeterminacy or escaping physical constraints, but rather understanding that everything is determined. To act with a thorough comprehension of reality is to act freely. According to Spinoza, freedom is inherently tied to reason, to the ability to comprehend existence as it truly is. We cannot pretend that 2 plus 2 equals 5. We must acknowledge that 2 plus 2 equals 4. This acceptance does not burden us or demand sacrifice. It exacts no toll because it does not diminish our essence, wound our pride, or sway our emotions or desires. Recognizing that 2 plus 2 make 4, rather than falsely believing that they make 5, offers greater freedom. Believing in a falsehood like 2 plus 2 equals 5 would only create conflict and complications in life. You can't undo the Pythagorean theorem or eliminate gravity. You have to deal with it and accept it, just as you accept the reality of death. Acknowledging that death is an inevitable part of existence is a challenge to ego, pride, and fear, but reason compels us to accept death as a rational fact of the physical world. By deeply internalizing the idea of death to the point where it no longer arouses fear, you free yourself from enslavement to this fear. Reason is a means of liberation. It frees you from your fears and passions, and from the tendency to deny or look for scapegoats for our inability to accept reality. Being a Spinozist or Stoic does not mean being fatalistic or resigned, but rather understanding the reasons and causes of existence, accepting what governs our physical world. Understanding is an act of internal assimilation that lightens and liberates, moving towards true freedom. Man becomes free through an effort of reason, transcending his passions. Acting in accordance with reason enables you to understand the chain of cause and effect, thus freeing yourself from passions and acting in complete freedom. You have the ability to transcend the material constraints imposed by your environment. As physical beings, external events could automatically arouse undesirable emotions in you, like a pen that follows an imposed trajectory without being able to change it. However, you, as the listener, possess the ability not to passively undergo the passions or emotions generated by external circumstances. You are not a slave to your passions. You have the power to understand them, to analyze them objectively, to reveal and understand their origins. This power enables you to see current emotions and their causes, to recognize the roots of your fears and anxieties, and to realize that these feelings are merely the result of a chain of cause and effect, not forces over which you are powerless. You hold the power of reason, and it's up to you to choose how to use it. Thank you for listening and for your commitment to this reflection.